A product's logo is vital when it comes to brand awareness and marketing. We see it everywhere. Iconic logos that have left an impression in our brains that'll probably be there forever. From food to clothing to electronics and of course, television. Which leads us right into the very reason we're here today. The logos of professional wrestling. Event logos to be specific. And while I planned on ranking the top 10 best of these logos, I quickly realized that there are just too many great designs to limit the list to just 10. So today we're going to take a look at wrestling's top 20 coolest event logos. Let's get started. Clash of the Champions was a television special that aired on TBS spanning multiple years, going from Jim Crockett Promotions to WCW in that time. While the original logo was nothing to scoff at, it was the design that appeared first in 1994 that truly piqued my interest. The scratch or scribble font had a more edgy feel to it, and the white, red, and black color trio really popped off the screen. The WWF would see a brand refresh in late 1997, transitioning to what we now know as the Attitude Era logo or the Scratch logo. And either by coincidence or perhaps inspiration, that logo would have a similar styling and color scheme as the Clash of the Champions logo. This one would be used until the final clash took place in 1997, with the WWE revival of the brand using a more traditional approach to the logo. It may have just made the list at 20, but it's still a great design. When we talk about WCW being great, the year 1999 doesn't typically enter that conversation. Let's be honest, this is where the wheels started to fall off, but there are a few diamonds in the rough here, including the logo for 1999's Mayhem. Not only did we see a pay-per-view event for the year, but we also saw a video game release donning the logo. And if a font ever embodied the very word it was made up of, this one did just that. Mayhem. With big white frantic lettering and sharp edges everywhere. This is one of the few designs where the reimagined WCW logo actually fits in quite well. Sadly, the logo was completely overhauled for 2000's event and it looked, well, I don't know, it's weird. It doesn't even have the WCW logo, just plain boring font in its place. Strange. You won't see many current era logos on this list, and it's not that they're bad, but marketing has changed a lot over the years and logos have become much more streamlined, simplified, and, well, generic. Take the NBA for example. The 90s had some of the best logos of all time, and a lot of them now just look like a generic font. With that being said, Backlash 2018 featured one of the coolest event logos seen within the promotion in recent years. The dual branding of the event resulted in a blue and red color scheme, and while most of the lettering is a bit on the simple side, the L does a good job of standing out amongst the crowd, giving this design a little spunk. The most recent Backlash logo sees the L a little more in line with the rest of the font, which sort of takes away from what made the previous version so cool. NXT TakeOver would feature quite the number of awesome logos throughout the years, so it's really hard to nail down the coolest one. Maple leaves, longhorns, skulls, and even the revival of events from wrestling's past have graced these designs. 2017's TakeOver would feature a look at Chicago's skyline with the NXT logo, event name, and hosting city's name clearly displayed in the brand's yellow and black color scheme. Yeah, it might not be as menacing as a pirate skull or as glamorous as a gold chain, but this clean and effective branding truly does stand out. World War III was a rather short-lived WCW pay-per-view, with the debut event taking place in 1995 and the last in 1998. It's one of those shows that often gets criticized for its lack of World Heavyweight Championship matches, and for the 3-ring 90-man battle royals that were honestly quite the mess. But nevertheless, I've always enjoyed these events, and the logos that came with them. This is another WCW design to feature this sort of scribbly font used here for the number 3. The inclusion of Earth with the WCW logo over the top is a nice touch, with the yellow accents rounding off the design. In 1998, we'd see the WCW/NWO logo added into the mix, wrapping around the planet Earth. In that year, an alternate version would appear in all black for on-screen graphics. Mayhem would replace World War III in 1999, but it's safe to say this logo would have changed regardless, as that year featured almost all new event logo designs. In 1999, WCW would rebrand the Fall Brawl logo into this, and while it's definitely not a bad look, it just couldn't replace the iconic logo that preceded it. Why, you ask? Well, for one, it features a tank. WCW always had a way with theming, and since Fall Brawl would host the annual War Games match, why not incorporate this into the logo? Throughout the years of this design, the logo would mostly appear in yellow and green, though there would be some alternate variations for broadcast graphics. We would also see versions without the tank and War Games branding. In 1998, the WCW logo would be replaced with the WCW NWO logo, which now sits in between the words Fall and Brawl, and this is probably my favorite version of the logo. Not that it's much different, but the taller presence just adds to the whole delivery here. Oh, and remember how that 1999 logo was pretty good as well? The same can't be said about the 2000 logo. Let's not even talk about it. The Great American Bash has an illustrious history of fantastic logos, but the one that fans are probably most familiar with would be the design that debuted in 1987 and ran through to 1998 with only minor alterations along the way. Sometimes the font was gold, sometimes white, and even blue, but nonetheless, this one truly captured the spirit of the event year after year with a very catchy design. Sure, it sort of feels dated and very early 90s, but that's as it should be. Some of our favorite logos are from the 80s and 90s, and some have even made a comeback in recent years. WCW would do this to the logo in 1999, and WWE would eventually revive the event with a very official-looking design. I'm not mad at it. Eventually, it would simply be known as The Bash, and all patriotic theming would be lost. But the very best of The Bash, the prime of the design, would lie right here. SmackDown has seen many logos throughout the years, but the very first would be the one to make the most impact. In a time when WWE had only run one main event caliber show per week, with other shows featuring low to mid-card talent or just being weekly recap shows, SmackDown would debut, changing the entire promotion. Not only would this weekly series feature the same top talent and storylines that were over on Monday Night Raw, but the show would utilize an almost entirely blue color scheme, something not often seen in the landscape of professional wrestling until the debut of WCW's Thunder just a year earlier. This unique shade of blue would be incorporated into the logo, along with a black WWF logo underlined with blue, again completely changing everything we'd seen from the promotion at the time. This design truly popped, and as the show's popularity grew, spawning a video game franchise with the branding, the logo was seemingly everywhere. This one was pretty short-lived, being replaced in 2001, but its roots and inspiration can clearly be seen in the current day's design. Here's one that we may all be guilty of mocking at one point or another, but the greatness that is the In Your House logo cannot be denied. The color scheme and clumsy letter placement define the decade of its conception and the target demographic that the promotion was going after. One of the event's running openings would see a computer-animated version of the logo attempting to enter a house, and eventually these would get even more bizarre, like when the logo was portrayed as a dog. As the Attitude Era approached, we would see the logo appear in a few alternate colors before the branding was ultimately phased out. In recent years, the logo would pop back into the scene for NXT as part of their tradition of reviving old event names from the 90s. Ah yes, Starrcade, an event even older than WrestleMania. The logo that would be used for most of the 90s was actually an evolution of the Battle Bowl logo. Battle Bowl being a tournament that was featured at Starrcade 91 and 92 before being a one-time only pay-per-view event of its own in 93. This one would feature quite the prestigious design, almost royal, if you will, with a very 1990s inspired color scheme. This art would remain most of the same through the decade, with a few palette swaps here and there, before ultimately being redesigned in 1998, but retaining much of the same overall look. 1999 would see another facelift for the logo, and despite this being part of the not-so-great years of the promotion, it's really quite clean and plays off of the tradition quite nicely. But it was that classic early 90s look that truly left its mark. With Survivor Series being one of the oldest events in WWE, it's no surprise that the logo would feature that classic WWE aesthetic that graced many of the promotion's events for many years. But all of that would change by the late 90s, because in 1996, this design would make its debut. And by 1998, with some slight modifications, we would see this. But this isn't the reason that this year's logo made the list. No, it would be the alternate version that would turn heads, as this human skull would be added to the design, adding to the promotion's new direction towards an edgier, more adult-oriented product. To top this off, the stage for the event would feature this skull, rivaling many of the heavily themed set designs from the competition, WCW. The Survivor Series logo would evolve throughout the years, but would never again reach these levels of cool. SummerSlam, currently one of the longest running events in WWE, and one of those classic logos that didn't do a whole lot, but everything it did right. The original design would run from 1988 to 1997, while still keeping true to the roots of this logo. One of my personal favorites is the 1994 rendition, complete with crispy strips of bacon and an egg yolk. No, but in all seriousness, I like how this one had an almost Southwest feel to it, though it oddly took place in Chicago. These versions of the original design just feel like summer, and while there would be some memorable designs to follow, many consider this era to be the best. WCW Saturday Night would hit airwaves in 1992 as the promotion's main weekly showcasing of its top talent. Most are probably familiar with this logo that ran from 1994 to 1999, and you might have even come across this one, though the show was on life support by this point. So maybe you haven't. Either way, the show's very first logo would appear in this form, donning blue and pink neon, more fitting for a weekly Saturday night show airing live from the hustling, bustling city of Atlanta. This theming would carry through the entire show until the 1994 retheming that featured a sort of futuristic aesthetic or something. It's a shame this logo only lasted 2 short years, because it's truly a gem and one of my favorite WCW logos of all time. Before Monday Night Raw would strike a deal with TNN, the network would host a weekly Friday night television show for ECW, and this was actually my introduction to the promotion, having only heard about it from some friends previously. Anyway, the show would feature one of the most menacing logos in wrestling history, with the ECW letters wrapped in barbed wire under an ominous red sky, while the word wrestling glows from within a stone platform below. We would also see this equally awesome version here, which sort of reminds me of that diamond plate version of the Nitro logo. ECW wrestling on TNN would be relatively short-lived, but will always have this striking visual as a reminder of its existence. Alright, it was tough to nail down a best out of all the Bash at the Beach logos. I mean, that original with the wave forming a fist, which was carried over from Beach Blast, and believe it or not, the 1999 version is spectacular despite the decline in the product. Even more surprising is that they didn't butcher it in 2000 like they did most of the other logos. But it's the version used for 96, 97, and 98 that truly make an impact, especially the version complete with surfboards and palm trees. The event would host the formation of the NWO as well as the final WCW appearance of Hulk Hogan, which is rather ironic. AEW would pick up the rights to the name and create their own version of the event, featuring a much more Miami Vice style of design over WCW's Pacific Island or tropical-inspired aesthetic. In 2020, WWE would regain the naming rights to the event, but it's currently unclear if they plan on using it anytime in the future. Regardless, this is one iconic logo in wrestling for many reasons, and one that still graces the face of merchandise all these decades later. With all of the fantastic WrestleMania logos through the years, it's truly hard to choose one out of the bunch. There's the OG, the 20th Century Fox-inspired design from WrestleMania 12, and even the incredible logo from the most recent event in Hollywood, brother. But there's just something about that WrestleMania 18 logo, mixing tradition with the new attitude of the promotion in recent years. The deep blue, accented with gold, is a nice touch, and the choice of a Roman numeral 10 with a Western Arabic 8. Yes, that's what they're called. I didn't know that until making this video. Blame the public school system. But back to the topic, I love this logo. It's simply perfect, if you ask me. Well, You had to know this one would make the list. I think that the significance behind this logo might make the design more appealing than it actually is. What do I mean by that? Well, yeah, it's a really cool design, but I think the very history tied to it is what helps make it so great. When I see this logo, I think of the NWO, I think of the rise of Goldberg, the innovative luchadors, that glorious set design. I mean, it's so much more than a logo. There's meaning behind this glorious piece of history. During its run, we'd see versions with the TNT logo, without it, a diamond plate version, and even a really cool NWO version from when the group took over an episode of Nitro. Coincidentally, before Nitro would hit the airwaves of TNT, the network would host a block of television on Saturday nights called Saturday Nitro with an equally cool logo. In 1999, the WCW brand would hit a refresh complete with new logos. During this time, Nitro would receive an updated version of the beloved logo, keeping with many of the same elements, but with a much more 2000s look and feel. And if you take a look at Guy Evans' book, Nitro, which is a great read by the way, you'll see that there were many design concepts for the refresh, and let's just say, yeah, it could have been much worse. More recently, AEW would debut its third weekly television show, Collision, using a logo heavily inspired by the classic Nitro design. This is definitely one of the greatest logos in wrestling history, going even beyond just its appearance. Here's another classic. There's really not a whole lot to say about this one, because the Royal Rumble logo is a shining example of art speaking louder than words. The gradient metallic effect screams 80s wrestling, while the symmetrical proportions deliver a clean and straightforward look. This one was used from 89 to 95 before being replaced by this design here, which actually I might prefer just a little bit more, but the classic design here holds a little more meaning behind it. As one of the WWE's current biggest yearly events, we've seen many more designs grace Royal Rumbles of the past. Some good, some, well, not so much. However, the original has withstood the test of time when others could not. Some of the greatest logos in wrestling have appeared for the yearly October pay-per-view for WCW, Halloween Havoc. Well, except for that one from 2000. While the first two events would feature this magnificently horror-themed design, it would be the one from 91 to 95 that would become the face of the brand. When you don't even need to read the words on the logo to know what it's representing, the marketing did its job. I mean, one look and it's easy to see this is Halloween. 1996 and 97 would see a new logo for the event before quickly returning to the previous look for 1998, this time featuring the NWO logo alongside that of WCW's. Dare I say the 1999 logo rivals that of the previous years? That font for the word Halloween is, it's just truly fitting. Look at that. So it should come as no surprise that this is the version WWE decided to use for the revival of the event under the NXT brand. As far as branding goes, it doesn't get much cooler than Halloween Havoc. In 1993, professional wrestling would change forever. With the debut of WWF Monday Night Raw, the promotion's premier weekly television show. By the late 90s, the show would evolve, becoming much grittier and adult-oriented with an industrial aesthetic and edgier all-around feel. To coincide with these changes, a new name, Raw is War, and a newly designed logo would make its debut. A simple red, white, and black color scheme would grace the military-style stenciled letters, all housed within a rectangular border. This, just like the Nitro logo, signifies a lot more than one sees at first glance. The Attitude Era holds some of the greatest memories for wrestling fans growing up during that era. The rise of superstars like The Rock, Triple H, and Steve Austin, the antics from factions like DX, the scantily clad women that prepubescent kids would wait all week to see, and everything else that made up the Monday Night Wars. This logo represents some of the greatest moments in wrestling, moments that many believe will never be topped, as crazy, silly, or as ridiculous as they were. They truly were special moments in time that only happen when planets align. Raw still airs every Monday night, marking over 30 years and many different logos of the show. But from 1997 to 2001, this logo meant at 9 p.m. on Monday night, nothing else matters. It was about to be a hell of a night. So what do you think about the list? You love it? You hate it? I'm sure there are many different opinions on this topic, and honestly I'd love to hear them all. So let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more top 10 or 20 videos. Bye bye now.